Coming up, it's Philosophy Talk.
Are you politically correct?
I think political correctness is a really cool thing. Where would we be without it? We'd still have racism, sexism, classism, ageism, speciesism.
Ken, I approve of political correctness, but I enjoy being politically incorrect. What does that make me?
The move to political correctness is the move to make certain thoughts unfashionable to express.
On the other hand, hypocrisy is the first step to progress.
There you go.
People talking trying to pick us up. Why won't they let us be? Bricks and stone may break my bones, but talk don't bother me.
I have thoughts left over from my childhood that I would no more express than jump off a 40-foot cliff into a pile of rubble.
Are you politically correct?
Our guest is former political speechwriter Leonard Steinhorn.
Political correctness. Coming up on Philosophy Talk after the news. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're coming to you from the studios of KALW in San Francisco.
Continuing conversations that begin at Philosopher's Corner on the Stanford campus.
Today, political correctness. We'll start by looking at how political correctness relates to issues of morality in both our private lives and the public sphere.
Then we'll look at the relationship between being PC and being irreverent. And finally, we'll explore how issues of censorship are tied to political correctness.
But John, let's back up a bit, way back to the beginning, and start from the very beginning. What exactly does this phrase political correctness mean? What does it mean?
Well, Ken, I can't give you a very straightforward answer. I actually think this is one case in which that part of the philosophy that you and I can know best, the philosophy of language, is actually of some use to somebody. The question, what do the words mean, is really much too simple for a loaded phrase like political correctness. Distinctions are needed.
Well, okay, Mr. Philosophy of Language, make one for me.
All right, here's a key one. The distinction between what a term stands for and how it presents what it stands for.
Oh, that's what Frege called sense and reference.
Or Carnap called intention and extension.
Or Mill called connotation and denotation.
Right. Well, maybe from a precise scholarly point of view, there are differences, but for our purposes, those all come to pretty much the same thing. The point is I can say, like, Ken Taylor and refer to you, or I can say the younger and more charming co-host of Philosophy Talk and refer to you, or I can even just say you and refer to you. 3 different ways of referring to the same guy. But these words all carry very different meanings, and that suggests different things are going on in our conversation.
Right, and each is a label with a slightly different meaning, connotation, sense, and that difference can influence, why we use it in what context, right? And sometimes, that difference can be aimed at the gut or at the brain. You can call me Ken and be very, you're my friend and it's informal, or you can call me Mr. Taylor and refer to me if you want to be more formal, or you can call me the father of Kiyoshi if you want to be kind of cuddly, touch and feely, but don't you dare call me, say, the N-word host of Philosophy Talk.
Well, there's just 2 hosts of Philosophy Talk, and wouldn't the N-word host of Philosophy Talk refer to you?
It would refer to me, but it would be offensive. It's unacceptable in civilized society to refer to me that way.
So using the N-word is a pretty paradigm example of political incorrectness. But a lot of less explosive terms get that title too. For example, in some circles, handicapped is politically incorrect, but disabled is okay. Hearing impaired is politically incorrect. Deaf isn't. These days, Afro-American isn't quite right, but African-American is okay.
Okay, so I got an idea. Try this for a definition. Political correctness, that means a way to refer to a group of people and their traits so that those people aren't offended.
That's not a bad definition. When you put it that way, it sounds very reasonable, but you've kind of left something out. To a lot of people, the term political correctness is itself a negative term. Accusing someone of being PC is a label used to ridicule what someone has said or the way that they said it. They chose their words too self-consciously, or they're not being honest, or they're trying to push me around intellectually by telling me how I should say what I think. It's been said by some that political correctness is just about the worst idea to come out of the 20th century.
Well, that seems to be an exaggeration, but there's a nice point here. We've both explained this connotation, denotation distinction by using the term political correctness, and we've exemplified this distinction as well, because, the term political correctness, it denotes kind of non-offensive speech, but it connotes, in some circles anyway, timidity, too preciousness. So it's wouldn't Mel, Frege, and Carnett be proud of us, John?
Oh, I think they would, Ken. The term political correctness, it's been around for the whole 40 years I've been teaching. It's a piece of artillery that both the right and the left have used for a long time. What does it mean today when our roving philosophical reporter, Zoe Corneli, hit the streets to find out exactly what it means today?
To really get a handle on the current status of political correctness, I figured the best people to talk to would be young people.
My name's Randy. I'm a student at the Art Institute, California, San Francisco.
Randy Zadie Hewling says he thinks it's good to be politically correct.
It definitely shows a sign of respect if you call Native American as opposed to Indian, or you go back to the football team and watching the Redskins. Redskins right there alone. But they're not going to change themselves to the Washington Native Americans because it's been a football team for so long. A lot of people probably wouldn't jive off of that.
To him, that means using up-to-date terminology when talking about race or gender.
I had a class just recently, a couple weeks ago, where a girl referred to African Americans as Negroes, and I'm like, whoa, what are you doing? You can't do that. You can't do that nowadays, man. There's a touchy issue in that class, but at the same time, it's like you got to understand that some people don't want to be called black. Some people definitely don't want to be called Negro. Me being part, I'd rather be called African American than other things.
So there's some support for the idea of being politically correct, but Randy's classmate, 17-year-old Leslie Fong, couldn't disagree more.
I think that the term politically correct is really just a soft way of saying censored. I think that what is politically correct is censorship in itself. And
so do you try to not be politically correct?
No, not at all. I'm not trying to make any particular effort to be edgy. I do tend to speak my mind, which can sometimes go overboard, but I try to be respectful, I guess you could say. It's better to just try and stay as proper as possible to avoid getting into trouble with anyone.
So that's interesting. You think that political correctness is censorship, but you allow yourself to be censored because...
Oh. Yeah, I'm an absolute hypocrite for that reason, but yeah, I believe it's censorship, but I'm one of the censored, as is the majority of the rest of the population.
The students are standing in a circle on a downtown street, chatting together on a break between classes. Leslie's friend, 21-year-old Brandon, chimes into the discussion.
Well, political correctness is kind of like it's someone has to set a limitation so that someone else can break it. So everyone goes, ooh, you're edgy. I think that people they have to label things as proper language and improper language, just like there's proper English and slang English. So I think political correctness makes sense to an extent when you're in a business setting, but when you talk normally, no one ever uses political correctness. No way, not here anyways.
Michael Ray, a 19-year-old advertising student, agrees. He says when he's with his friends, he's much less politically correct than in a formal context.
I say faggot all the time. I'm a gay man, and I'll say faggot like it's nothing. I'll put glasses on. I'm like, do you think me look like a faggot? What's going on? Or, if I'm around people and I'm trying to make a point about something, I'll be like, I'm a gay man, I'm a homosexual, this and that, blah, 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 blah. And so...
Madeline Brown is not a student. She's passing by on her way home from the farmer's market. She remembers when the concept of political correctness was still fresh and exciting.
It was kind of the ideal 90s, and you thought Clinton was going to make a change, and Lollapalooza was around, and it was a bit different, and you thought maybe things would go well.
She says that ideal got lost in the polarized world of media mudslinging. Now, Brown says she doesn't really try to be politically correct.
I don't think necessarily. I think that was part of the backlash. Maybe had it correct is that it became an umbrella of things that a lot of people felt like they had to check the right boxes and toe the right lines, and that this made them good or acceptable or tolerant or peaceful people, as opposed to really looking at every situation and every person and themselves and what everything meant to them.
For Philosophy Talk, I'm Zoe Corneli.
I'm John Perry. With me is Ken Taylor.
Our guest today is Leonard Steinhorn. He's professor in the School of Communication at American University. He's author of The Greatest Generation, in defense of the baby boom legacy, and it's a rousing defense. It makes me proud to be a baby boomer. Leonard, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Well, thank you for having me, and let me just correct you slightly. It's the greater generation, because I wouldn't want to be taking Tom Brokaw's name and being accused of plagiarism there.
Oh, right. I said greatest, I meant greater. Sorry about that, Leonard.
Well, Leonard, this is John Perry. I'm not a member of the greatest generation or the greater generation, but the one in between, the war baby generation. But let's talk about you. Tell us briefly about yourself, and how'd you come to be preoccupied or occupied with the intergenerational warfare or comparison issues and the whole problem of political correctness?
Well, when I wrote my book on the baby boomers, it was really interesting to see what boomers were criticized for. On the one hand, people like the William Bennetts of the world said, oh, boomers, it's all moral relevance. They have no standards. They don't care about anything. Anything goes. They allow anybody to do anything. On the other hand, some very similar people to Bennett were accusing the boomer generation of introducing political correctness. So how can you be relevant on the one hand and politically correct on the other? And that got me thinking about the whole sort of relationship between private morality and public morality. And what happened is that in the 50s, we had very strict standards on private morality, but we sort of gave a wink and a nod to bigotry and stereotyping and all the rest in public morality. And boomers flipped that on its head. So what happened is that boomers basically ushered in a society in which, you do your own thing as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. It's your personal choice what your private morality is. But public morality would be held to moral scrutiny. So bigotry, hate, stereotyping would be considered immoral. Okay? And I think that's how the whole politically correct debate got going, and that's why I'm interested in it.
Well, I'm a little puzzled because I would have thought that my generation, that is the war baby generation, the John Kerrys and the Jane Fondas were the ones who really pushed the political correctness agenda starting in the 60s and 70s, and that a lot of the most virulent critics of political correctness are from the baby boomer generation. These young right-wing neocons that have really poured vilification upon the whole anti-war generation. How do you react to that?
Well, you can't just say it's the whole anti-war generation and not, sort of include boomers in that.
Well, that's true.
In fact, there's, certainly in every generation, there are people who are opposed to the general zeitgeist of a generation. You had loyalists in the Revolutionary War generation, but we think about the Revolutionary War generation in one context, and we don't include the loyalists as defining their zeitgeist. But I think to a great extent what's happened is that boomers sort of presided over a shifting in attitudes in our society. So irrespective of what we hear in the media, which is too often sort of the food fight and the he said, she said and the controversy, irrespective of that, if you actually look at the attitudes and values and norms of our society, they have been shifting on a more inclusive, accepting, tolerant basis over the last 30 or 40 years. And the dividing line generally has been between boomers and those older. So boomers and those younger are far more socially liberal than those who are older. And in fact, today, the younger generation tends to be the most socially liberal and inclusive in our nation's history.
I take your point, and I wouldn't want to dispute that, and I think that's a darn good thing. I salute that change, and your book is a fascinating read about that. But there is a question. I want to go back to the connection between that and political correctness, because, you said bigotry and all that would become immoral. And that's right. Prejudice and bigotry should become immoral. But what really became unfashionable, I think, was to express attitudes that could be seen as bigoted or prejudicial, and a lot of attitudes that people thought weren't actually that. They became for a while afraid to express. So I want a distinction between the morality of the attitude and the fashionability of the mode of expression. And I want to know if you agree with that distinction, first of all. Then I'll ask you a deeper question.
I think it goes far beyond fashionability or style. I mean, I think it really speaks to a culture's norms and how those norms have changed. And in any culture, you set certain norms, and not all people live up to those norms, but you hope that those norms are something that the culture, society, and population ultimately move toward.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you about that, but after a break, I still want to probe you a little bit further. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today, we're discussing political correctness with Leonard Steinhorn from American University.
We've begun talking about the contribution of the baby boomers to private and public morality, the importance of that distinction, and how political correctness fits in, what it has to do with irreverence, and so forth and so on. We'll continue with that in the next segment. How do you see the connection? Does being PC threaten being lighthearted and being humorous? Does it express the insight, on the other hand, that language can hurt and that the seemingly innocuous jokes can express and reinforce vile prejudices? What do you think?
Join us by calling toll-free 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Political correctness versus irreverence. Plus your calls and emails when Philosophy Talk continues.
Have you ever told an offensive joke? Have you ever laughed at one? Do you tell blonde jokes? Do you laugh at them? Has the movement towards political correctness or the reaction to it influenced the way you tell jokes, your sense of humor? Tell us your thoughts. I'm John Perry, and I have gray hair. You'll never know if I was a blonde.
And I'm Ken Taylor. The toll-free number, 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Or email us at comments@philosophytalk.org.
Our guest is Leonard Steinhorn from American University.
So, Leonard, let me go back to what I was trying to ask you before the break. I don't know if I was being clear. I grant you that there's been a lot of consolidation of progressive, liberal, social values. I grant you that. But I think there's been less consolidation than meets the eye, because I think that one of the things that the political correctness strategy, as it were, did was to try to eliminate these things by trying to make them unsayable. And people seem to have thought that if you can't express homophobic thoughts, then eventually you won't think homophobic thoughts. But I think that strategy failed, and part of the backlash is people had these thoughts that they feared would be categorized as homophobic, and they wouldn't express them, but they kept having them. And then they said, wait a minute, this is censorship. This is trying to tamp out legitimate discourse. What do you think about that thought of mine?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think any society is going to be free of prejudice and bigotry. And if folks don't express those thoughts, then perhaps their children don't inherit those thoughts, which may have actually be partly accountable for why this next generation is so socially inclusive. Ken, I noticed in your blog this morning.
I wrote a blog this morning, folks.
Okay, that you had three consequences for some of this. First, you say many racists may retain their racist views but fail to express them. Then you talk about some non-racists may fail to express views because of concern about being labeled racist. And you talk about people who may not think they're racist and who value expressing their views will pay the cost of being, labeled racist if they say something. But there's a fourth consequence, which you don't talk about. And that's if you shun bigotry, if you make it socially unacceptable, then what it does is it potentially allows more opportunities for women, for minorities, for others to move in the mainstream. And all social science has shown that the more contact you have among people as peers, the less bigotry the culture becomes. So in many ways, if you can try and shun or make socially unacceptable these outward manifestations of whatever people have inside of them, it creates a more fluid society that creates more opportunity, more contact, and therefore less bigotry. And I think that's a positive value in the long run, and I think we're seeing the evidence of it in this next generation.
Well, let me try to steer between the Scylla and Charybdis of this debate. I mean, I think actually there's some truth to what Ken says, but the term political correctness, and this is part of its genius, lumps together so many different things. My own experience about this is pretty personal. About 1987, what was that, 20 years ago, I was part of a group at Stanford that put forward a language code. It was modeled after what we thought was Supreme Court opinions, and said that certain things, so-called fighting words, were actually opposed to the Stanford's what's called fundamental standard. And we had in mind just things like the N-word and really, defacing pictures of people and so forth and so on. But boy, at that time I was the only one on the committee that really did email. I got 1,000 emails, and I became convinced that what's clear in my mind ain't clear to the public. On the one hand, people really saw this as an attempt at thought control, right? They thought you're saying you can't raise issues of say IQs of African Americans being lower than others. You can't debate that issue in class. That would be ruled out. And other people, I thought that was silly. But then when I read the emails by the other people, I said, no, it's not so silly, because some people they just don't see the distinctions. And political correctness lumps together so many different things. The perfectly reasonable idea of not using certain words that are just historically outre. The idea of trying to make people think about how they express their thoughts, however vile the thoughts may be, and the idea of not having the thoughts. And the word just lumps it all together. It's either its genius or its curse.
What do you think, Leonard?
I agree with you. It does lump a lot of things together, and I personally oppose those speech codes. I think they're silly. I think more important is to establish norms and to keep establishing them and to keep talking about them and to keep trying to make them sort of socially unacceptable. We don't make smoking illegal in our country, but we try and find ways to discourage it. And I think that's certainly one model that you can follow. But I mean, unfortunately, what happens is that the phrase politically correctness often falls on the issue of race, which I think is so it's far larger than political correctness. It goes to our larger issue of race in our culture, because you wouldn't have people defending the right of a teacher, for example, to talk about the Holocaust, that it didn't exist.
Right.
Okay? I don't think you'd have that. I don't think anybody would be talking about political correctness if a university went after a professor who decided to say the Holocaust didn't happen. So what happens is that this also gets loaded up into sort of this complex dynamic of race in our society, when political correctness is always used when it happens to be that people are trying to discourage racially hostile or racially insensitive comments.
I think you have a fine point, Leonard. Let's hear from some of our callers. 1-800-525-9917. 1-800-525-9917. And Sarah in San Francisco is on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Sarah.
Hi. I had 2 points I wanted you to comment on, if possible. One is that a PC, to people, I think, of my generation, I understand it began with communism, and it was popularly used in Russia and China, as a very oppressive term, picked up by the right wing to sort of associate those anti-racist left-wingers, you know what I'm saying? And the second thing, a phrase I like is, racism is in the air we breathe, meaning you can be reinfected, you shouldn't be ashamed, but you should keep working on it.
Thanks, Sarah. Leonard, do you have any comments on Sarah's 2 points?
Well, I agree with what Sarah's saying about, sort of keep working on it. And that's why I think you need to have strong norms in society that encourage and reinforce the idea that we all keep working on it. But I do think that politically correct also came out of the left in this country. So a bunch of left-wingers from the 60s and 70s made fun of their sort of more sort of super serious, humorless folks on the left who seem to be very, very rigid on certain issues. So that phrase was also used to poke fun at a certain degree of rigidity. And I think rigidity ought to be poked fun at. But I do think that we ought to work hard as a culture to establish certain norms.
Yeah, I mean, the term political correctness is one thing, and the history of that term is an interesting history. But I still think there is a kind of strategy that was the strategy of the left. As it started winning victories over racism and sexism and homophobia, it also started winning victories about what I don't know what else could call it except speech fashion, things that were not sayable, right? And I think it's victory over the speech fashion faster than it's victory over the substantive doctrines, and that's, I think, part of why there eventually came a backlash. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree with that.
Well, I think that to me, the Sarah makes a very good point. And political correctness, I think, is firstly, don't call me Mr., call me comrade. That's not politically correct. And so I think it was brought into the debate as a term of abuse by the right wing, and some left-wing people were so naive they didn't realize where it came from. But it's still one of these portmanteau terms that can be very misleading. But it also makes a point. It's very easy to slide from one thing to the other. I want to challenge you guys, though. I thought you both seemed to say that it'd be okay to discipline a university professor who lectured, had skeptical doubts about the Holocaust. So first, which Holocaust did you have in mind? The Armenian Holocaust, or the Americans' Holocaust against the U.S. Holocaust against the Native Americans, or the Jewish Holocaust? And why would a university have a right to hector someone who had that view out of the classroom?
Leonard, you said that. I may have agreed with you, but I want to put you on the spot about that one. Since you're the guest.
And that's just a view that no one's
I was
allowed
speaking
to
of
examine?
what's commonly called the Holocaust with a capital H, what happened in Germany and Europe and during World War II. If somebody so chooses to base their scholarship on that, I suppose they can. I don't really think that they would get tenure.
Well, no, that's a different point. The guy that bases on scholarship won't get tenure, but you can say a lot of things in the classroom that won't get you tenure.
Right, but if you're spewing out lies and taking that and your responsibility as a professor is not to spew out lies, then certainly you're violating what you're doing in the classroom.
No, wait a minute, Leonard.
Lies versus interpretation of the truth are certainly different things.
Right.
But there's a truth and there's a lie in this particular case, and I think if somebody's spewing out lies and basing their entire class on that, then I think a university ought to have some issues with that.
Let's get some more.
That's not a speech code.
Yeah, let's get some more callers in here. 1-800-525-9917. We're talking about political correctness, and we're ranging far and wide. And Stephanie in San Francisco is on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Stephanie.
Hi. I just wanted to go back more to your point where I agree with you on the fact that not being able to utter these words doesn't change what's really going on. And what really goes on is that people have stereotypes in their mind and preconceived notions. And one I really get all the time is, being a female in the IT industry is that, women just aren't good at technical things, and it comes in our culture from, all the commercials where the women are at home taking care of babies to all the way through. And I get told that I shouldn't be offended because I'm the exception to the rule, clearly, but the fact is that rule exists in people's minds, and making it prohibitive for them to say so just doesn't change what people are thinking about this sort of thing,
Yeah, Stephanie, you and I are on the same page. And Leonard, I want to press you a little bit more on this because I think it makes it harder when these negative attitudes are not publicly expressible. In one way, it makes it easier because you said this thing about opportunities, and that's important, and I agree with that. That seems like an important point. But it also makes it harder because it makes an apparent victory only apparent. Nobody expresses these attitudes. They know it's unfashionable to express these attitudes. But if they still have them and act on them, right, it's much harder to combat them.
You're suggesting that the reality behind the language hasn't changed over the years.
Well, I'm not saying it hasn't changed at all.
Well, all right, but you see, it has changed significantly, quite powerfully.
I agree with you.
To the point that, for example, we have somebody who may be elected president of the United States who's an African American, which I can't imagine would have happened in a previous era. But Stephanie's point is interesting too, because certainly there are attitudes that still need to change. There still need a dynamic of changing. But the funny thing is that in years past, someone like Stephanie wouldn't have even been hired for those jobs.
Right.
Okay? She wouldn't have even been seen as the exception to whatever rule that these folks had.
Let me just interrupt you really briefly. One of the things I love about your book is how vivid you make what the 50s were really like for people, for many, many people. I think, especially younger and younger generations, don't have any idea how oppressive our society was back then, right after the war.
I got thousands of emails from that book, and especially from many women who said, I would work in a job and people would measure how high my skirt was. Or I'd apply for a mortgage and people would make me sign something as to whether I was on a birth control pill to make sure I wouldn't have a child and therefore wouldn't be able to pay off my mortgage.
Well,
I think
a
far different society.
I think that's absolutely right. You can look at a phenomenon and just take the phenomenon, call it political correctness, call it the whole liberal pushing that people should be careful about what they say and abuses of that and university thought codes. The whole thing, it has its downside, but it really has a terrific upside, and you really make that point in your book. Life is a lot different than it was in the 50s, and maybe some of it is, you have these abuses. Some kid got in trouble, according to the lore anyway, down at Cal State or Cal Poly Pomona for using the word plantation in the wrong context. That's pretty weird, right? But balance that with all the good that attention to language has brought with it. I think you're right.
Irene in Berkeley's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Irene.
Yeah, that's interesting you brought that point up, because that was just what I was thinking, is that one of the problems I have with the whole use of PC, which is with the words, is that they become too complex semantically. In other words, you might come up with a phrase that after, is that one okay? Oh, no, that's not quite right. We're going to have to invent another one because that first one just didn't cut it somehow. And it goes on ad nauseum, and you're just, after a while, you're like, what? And that kind of bothers me because, I think language should be direct. I'm not saying, you should, insult anyone. Of course not, And I certainly think that aspects of PC have their place. But I do think there's a difference between what is allowed in society and the use of PC in language. I think that's a really major point because, how you behave and how you express yourself, I think, are different. And in terms of young people, I substitute teach, and I've noticed that in a lot of the schools where I sub, the youth population is a lot more diverse than it was when I was growing up, or even when my sister's children were in school. And I think a lot of times young people are a lot more tolerant of one another because they're in situations where they pretty much better be. Not only that, they get to see other groups side by side. They learn about them, and they realize that the differences aren't, what they might have thought they were.
Those are very good points, and we've got some emails that are kind of along the same line. Let me just run over a couple of them briefly. Fred makes the rather skeptical point: is there any scientific evidence that political correctness has ever influenced anything? Courtly makes the point that it's hard to keep up. Terms are changing, as one of the people in Roving Philosophical Reporters interview said. You go from Negro, which was okay in the 50s, to black, to Afro-American, to African-American. And then Donald says, in the Bay Area, if you question affirmative action, you're accused of racism. If you suggest there are profound differences between a man and a woman, you're accused of being a Neanderthal sexist pig. If you question global warming, you're accused of being a sellout to oil companies. The rampant PC in the Bay Area shuts off intelligent discourse. So those are all interesting points. The question I want to raise up, intelligent discourse is one thing. How about humorous discourse? I think I'd rather do without intelligent discourse than humorous and irreverent discourse. Does PC threaten that?
Well, we'll take that question up after a short break. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're discussing political correctness with Leonard Steinhorn from American University.
In the next segment, we're going to talk about censorship and being PC. Have the forces of political correctness changed the way you talk? Have they changed the way you think? Do they impinge on your freedom of speech and thought? And jokes, I should say, too.
The politics of political correctness, plus more of your calls and emails when Philosophy Talk continues.
Nice to people who are inferior to you. It's only for a week, so have no fear. Be grateful that it doesn't last all year.
Do you let your children use the N-word? I bet not. Does it make sense for a high school to ban the use of the word? For a college to have a law against it in the city code? I'm John Perry. This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. That would not be PC. I'm Ken Taylor. The toll-free number for you to join us is 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Email us at comments@philosophytalk.org. And if you call in, you can ask an expert on the subject. That's Leonard Steinhorn from American University, our guest today.
Leonard, as a matter of historical fact, since you've done so much work on this, what really was the connection, or is the connection, between the movement towards political correctness and actual cases of censorship? What are the most grievous cases, and are they kind of outliers, or do they indicate that there's something wrong with the whole idea of political correctness?
Well, I think what happened is that some well-intentioned people sort of went a little wild trying to impose and create illegalities on certain forms of speech. And I think those folks really went overboard. Now, you can't blame them for having decent intentions to try and get people to think more inclusively or to look at people as people, not just as sort of stereotypes. But trying to impose that through codes and laws, I think, is very, very misguided. But, here's the problem on this. The media will always highlight the bad news, the weird, the unusual, the exceptional. And certainly people have gone overboard on political correctness. But you can take any abuse in society, and if you choose to generalize it, my gosh, you can look at abuses in corporations and then say capitalism is no good. So I think we have to be balanced by not letting the tail of the media wag the dog of cultural analysis on all of this and not get focused on those few incidents in which people have gone overboard.
Well, Leonard, I tend to agree with you. But I must say, on this issue, I sometimes have the feeling that I'm a fish swimming around in the water and not seeing the water. Because so many people, like our emailer, Donald, the rampant PC in the Bay Area shuts off intelligent discourse. They attack the person's character instead, and it comes mostly from the left. That's how he ends that. You hear these people on right-wing radio talking about the liberal media, and I'm just blind. I can't see what they're talking about. It seems to me they're talking about the objective media, but they really feel this.
No, but wait a minute, guys. This is why I think that there's a cost to certain kinds of talk, cost to your reputation. And people are unsure whether views that they hold sincerely, right, will, if expressed, will negatively affect their reputation. Why? I'm not quite sure. And maybe their views are kind of mildly racist or not quite racist or something, but they're negative views in some sense, and they don't want to pay and they resent the social cost that is imposed on them. I think that's a real phenomenon.
But why doesn't Donald go after Rush Limbaugh for talking about feminazis? Yeah. Bottom line is that there are people on the right and people on the left who are just plain stupid in terms of how they try and shut down debate or how they diminish some other folks. And I think that's where it gets overboard. But the bottom line is if we keep our eye on the prize, which is a more humane, inclusive, tolerant society, and work toward those norms, that's where this issue ought to be focused. If we only focused on the extremes, then we forget the mainstream, which has been moving in a far better direction.
Let me give you, since we're talking about censorship, let me give you a range of cases that come out of my experience as a resident fellow in the Stanford system. Case number one, young freshman, 16, 17 years old, African-American woman comes to Stanford, first day of school. She's walking up to her dorm. The resident assistants have learned her name. They're singing a little song of welcome, and a drunken senior says, "Hey, you little N-word, go back to where you came from. We don't want you here at Stanford." Should he be punished, right? Should there be anything in the code that allows him to be punished for using that vile language? That's case one. Case two, some kid tells blonde jokes at the dorm meetings, and he just won't quit telling blonde jokes. Should there be some coercive way to make him stop? Case three, a professor has become convinced that blondes are actually inferior. He has amassed lots of statistical evidence and has a whole biological theory.
This is hypothetical.
This is hypothetical. He doesn't have tenure, but he's got 3 years to go on his contract, and he's really serious about this. Should anything be done to stop him from explaining this to his students, or should they just be left to defeat it on themselves? So what's your reaction to those?
Those are complicated. I think the first one, clearly that shouldn't happen. The second one's kind of borderline, and the third one, the guy did free inquiry, right? So that I have pretty strong reaction.
So you really wouldn't have a problem with a speech code that just at let's say a non-public university that just applied to cases like the first.
No, I wouldn't at all myself. Would you, Leonard?
Well, personally, I think the first one should be sort of put on banners in the newspaper, and the person who said that should be shamed in front of everybody. I don't think there's any problem with talking about somebody who may have violated those norms. And with the sort of ACLU perspective, the more speech, the better. So somebody like that, do a front page article in the newspaper about what this person said to the restaurant. I can assure you that it would have a greater impact on him and on the community immunity than any speech code would,
Right.
because then he could hide behind free speech and make himself out to be a victim.
Oh yeah, but how's the university going to decide which one it tells the press about and which one it doesn't?
Well,
You'll need some
that's
code.
an interesting
I'll
question.
shut up for a minute.
There's a question. Let's get
some.
let's get some callers in here. Francesca in San Francisco's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Francesca.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call. I have an observation, and that is I'm from the South, and I grew up there. I've been in San Francisco now for 30 years, but in the South, when I was young, people were pretty overtly politically incorrect. Now, moving to California, and particularly San Francisco, which is supposedly the most liberal city in the country, but just in California in general, I think people have had to become sort of subversive racist in that they can't voice their racism overtly, so it comes out in certain policies, like when we vote on immigration or affirmative action, and against those policies, it comes out in subversive ways. And if I think someone had said that, in San Francisco she teaches in a diverse school, well, that's actually not the trend. The trend is that the public schools are getting more segregated. I think there's a lot of racism in this country that's hidden because political correctness has sort of made it more subversive.
Francesca, you're making my point again, and thank you very much. And I don't think, John or Leonard, you've adequately responded to my point. Otherwise, Francesca wouldn't feel the need to make it again. But if stuff is driven underground, that doesn't mean it's driven out of existence, and then people still act on their underground, unexpressible impulses.
Well, I agree with the point in general, and I'm sure the phenomenon has happened, but I'm a little resistant to the idea that people who oppose affirmative action are always racist, or people that have problems with our immigration policies are always ethnicists, or whatever the word is. Some of them are, a lot of them aren't.
Well, I agree with that totally, and that's part of this reputational cost. If you fear that a policy might be regarded as racist, even if you think it's not, and even if objectively it's not, there's still this cost to expressing it, so it makes public discourse less honest. What do you think about that?
Actually, there's another side to this, which is that you want to make sure that the consequences of the policy don't foster or fan or promote racism. But, the last caller made an important point, but I think everyone forgets the fact that racism and bigotry existed in far more powerful ways before anyone even started talking about political correctness. It's not as if this sort of emerged out of nothing and all of a sudden politically correct behavior or attitudes are promoting it. This stuff was powerful, entrenched, well-rooted in society in every single institution. That it is far less rooted right now can partly be attributed to a change in the norms that may be reflected in the sort of phrase political correctness.
I think, Leonard, I would not deny what you had to say. Alice in San Francisco is on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Alice.
Thank you. Actually, maybe my call is redundant because Leonard just said what I was calling it to say, which was that the whole idea of political correctness evolved organically out of the mass awareness that bigotry was unacceptable. And it didn't, it wasn't handed down from Moses on the Mount. It came from the mass human awareness that people began to question whether, in fact, bigotry was a good thing. And even if they had harbored in themselves bigoted attitudes, it made them look at them and, examine them. Who does this hate belong to? It belongs to me. It's my hate. So I think that even though it does cause a lot of confusion and it's not going to cure racism, it will help make people take responsibility for their own attitudes. And it's going to be tricky because, you really can't legislate love, but you can make people question their own hate, I think.
Alice, good point. Leonard, I don't want to deny the point that Alice was making. I think it's a very good point, and I think your shunning point is a very good point. I just think it's a complicated thing because while you make a cost to expressing certain things, that cost doesn't necessarily go to believing certain things, but expressing certain things, making certain expressions costly, that's a good thing too. That has an upside too. I wouldn't deny that.
Let me make just the reverse point, though. We've been talking mostly about not expressing thoughts and not using language that has to do particularly with ethnicity and things like that. But there's a whole other side of this that I think Leonard tells in his book, and that's the being allowed to have certain thoughts that had been politically incorrect. When I was raised, the idea that any American war was unjust was something I don't think I could think when I was 16 years old. Now I can think it, I can express it. A lot of people agree with it. So the whole movement that comes out of the war babies and the baby boomers has allowed us to express a lot of thoughts as well as maybe stifled some.
So, Leonard, why don't you make one last comment on whatever you like there?
Well, a couple of things. One, I think we have a far more diverse society in terms of expression than at any time in our history. Just look at the internet. It's all out there. So the fact that people are saying political correctness is stifling free speech, I think have it wrong. What it may be stifling is social expressions or public expressions of hate and bigotry. And it's also built on the idea that language has meaning. I mean, the whole development of the phrase Ms. Was based on the idea that language has meaning, that in those days you were either Miss or Mrs., which connoted your marital status when men didn't have that associated with them. It was just Mr. So I think that it's okay to think about language and the meaning it has and the consequences it has in society in terms of what type of society we want to become. And if political correctness, if that's the phrase, that contributes to a better society, well, in moderation, it's not such a bad thing.
So, Leonard, on that note, I want to thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Very interesting discussion.
Our guest has been Leonard Steinhorn. He's professor in the School of Communication at American University. He's author of The Greater Generation in Defense of the Baby Boom Legacy. So, John, very briefly, what did you learn today?
Well, today I learned that we get a lot of callers and emails about the subject of political correctness. It's really a subject in the philosophy of language, so that warms the cockles of my hearts. In preparing for this, though, I read a lot of stuff that was really stupid from the left and the right and the middle. It was a little depressing.
Yeah, I agree with you that there is a lot of stupid stuff out there, but Leonard's book is not one of them. It's a really intelligent book, and it really is amazing to me, the things that were once sayable and thinkable, right, just as a matter of course, and they aren't anymore, right? And I really do. I think he's right. It's the baby boom generation basically rebelling against the parents. I really, with a little help from you, war baby.
Thank you.
But we were at least main foot soldiers because there were so many more of us than there were of you, right? We did a great thing.
My colleagues, like Jane Fonda, were the leaders, and your colleagues were the foot soldiers. I'll accept that. Yeah.
With an occasional going back and forth between the foot soldier thing and the leader thing. But just in time for the holidays, we've made available the complete archive of Philosophy Talk, folks. All 147 episodes in one package, one easy package. For more information, go to our website, www.philosophytalk.org.
For the final word, we turn to the fastest officer of the thought police, Ian Scholes, the 60-second philosopher.
Ian Scholes. Patrick J. Buchanan's The Death of the West lays the blame for today's political correctness on cultural Marxism, which had its origins in 1933 at Columbia University at the Institute for Social Research, also known as the Frankfurt School. It was called the Frankfurt School because the thinkers there had fled from Frankfurt, Germany, after Hitler took charge. Those thinkers were Theodor Adorno, Erich Fromm, Wilhelm Reich, and Herbert Marcuse. Buchanan believed that these four guys spawned the PC Catechism. The worst of those was Herbert Marcuse. He made David Horowitz's list of the 101 most dangerous academics in America, published in 2006, even though Marcuse had been dead since 1979. Horowitz writes, quote, his famous essay on repressive tolerance, written in 1965, is the justification for the suppression of conservative speech on the grounds that the views of right-wing intellectuals reflect the rule of an oppressive and already dominant social class. Marcuse identified revolutionary tolerance as tolerance that enlarged the range and content of freedom, unquote. Okay, but Marcuse also writes in that same essay, quote, tolerance toward that which is radically evil now appears as good, because it serves the cohesion of the whole on the road to affluence or more affluence. The toleration of the systematic moronization of children and adults alike by publicity and propaganda, the release of destructiveness and aggressive driving, unquote. Aside from Marcuse's apparent disapproval of affluence, and probably his definition of good and evil, the statement, tolerance toward that which is radically evil now appears as good, is something cultural conservatives would definitely agree with. And how about disapproval of the toleration of the systematic moronization of children and adults alike by publicity and propaganda? Again, conservatives might disagree about the nature of the propaganda, but not that American children and adults are morons. Conservatives have been railing about the dumbing down of America for years. And the toleration of the release of destructiveness and aggressive driving? Well, gosh, we're all on the same page there. Rich, poor, right, left, blue, red. Everybody hates a bad driver. If that isn't common ground, I don't know what is. So come on, America. Slow down, use your turn signal, shut up, and drive. I gotta go.
Brian Shows, the only man who can solve a philosophical problem in 60 seconds.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University, copyright 2007.
Our executive producer is David Demarest.
Special thanks to Devin Strolovich, Daniel Elstein, Zoe Corneli, Merle Kessler, and Mark Stone.
Philosophy Talk is sponsored in part by Powell's City of Books, on the web at powells.com. Support also comes from the Templeton Foundation.
And from various groups at Stanford University, the Friends of Philosophy Talk, and the members of KALW San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed in this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders.
The conversation continues on our website, philosophytalk.org. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.